The sun was just beginning to rise over the city of Los Angeles, casting its golden rays on the bustling streets of downtown. The air was warm, as always, a little thick with the scent of fresh coffee, concrete, and the faint promise of another busy day ahead. For Mia Chen, it was just another morning behind the counter of her favorite local coffee shop. Bean Brew, a quaint cafe nestled in the heart of Silver Lake. A neighborhood known for its hipster vibes and indie charm. Mia was the type of person who found peace in the simple things, working the early shift at the cafe, crafting the perfect espresso for her regulars, and watching the world go by. She wasn't interested in the glitter of fame or fortune, and certainly didn't chase after the lavish lifestyle that California seemed to offer at every corner. Instead, she loved the routine, the steady rhythm of her days, and the comfort that came with knowing exactly what each day would bring. That morning, as she moved through the motions of brewing coffee and greeting customers, she noticed a man walk in, his presence just a bit more noticeable than the others. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple white shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of crisp white sneakers that had clearly been well cared for. But what caught her attention wasn't his attire, it was the quiet confidence he exuded. There was a subtle energy about him, the kind you couldn't quite place, but you felt it anyway. "Hey, can I get a black coffee? No sugar?" His voice was smooth, warm, with a touch of something that suggested he wasn't from around here. Mia couldn't place it, but there was an easy calm in his tone that made her pause. She smiled politely and nodded, already reaching for the coffee beans. "Sure, coming right up." As she worked, she couldn't help but notice how he seemed to take in the surroundings, his gaze lingering on the cozy interior of the cafe with an almost nostalgic look. Most people who came in for coffee were distracted, glued to their phones or buried in their laptops. But not this guy. There was something about him that made him stand out, yet he seemed completely comfortable being overlooked in a crowd. The coffee was ready, and Mia slid the cup over to him. "Here you go. One black coffee." He gave her a warm smile, his eyes lingering just a moment longer than usual. "Thanks. I've been looking for a good place like this in LA. It's harder than you'd think." Mia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment. "I'm sure it is. There are a lot of chain places around here, but nothing like this. It's a different vibe, you know." "Exactly," he said, his gaze thoughtful. "I like it here. It's simple." Mia chuckled and took a step back. "Simple is good. It's what keeps the regulars coming back." He nodded, then took a sip of his coffee, clearly savoring the rich taste. For a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. He wasn't the typical customer who came in, ordered quickly, and disappeared. There was something about him, something that intrigued Mia. She went back to her duties, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this interaction, however brief, was different from the usual encounters she had with her customers. There was something more genuine about him, something that made her wonder who he really was. Alexander Lee had been to dozens of cafes just like this one across Los Angeles, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the laid-back energy, or maybe it was the fact that he had grown tired of the endless corporate meetings and constant whirlwind of his CEO life. He was used to people bowing down to him, treating him like some kind of celebrity, everyone always wanting a piece of him. But here, at Bean and Brew, nobody knew who he was. And for the first time in months, he felt ... normal. The coffee was just how he liked it, strong, black, and no nonsense. He took a sip, leaning against the counter as his eyes scanned the room, taking in the small details, the mismatched furniture, the indie music playing softly in the background, the people casually chatting, unaware of the man standing in front of them. It was a relief, a brief escape from his high-powered world. And then there was me, the girl behind the counter. She hadn't been like the others. Most people, especially in a city like LA, were busy trying to get ahead, to climb the social ladder. But Mia seemed different. She didn't ask about his job, or try to flatter him with fake compliments. She was simply ... genuine. That, more than anything, intrigued him. Over the next few weeks, Mia and Alexander found themselves running into each other more frequently. He'd stop by the cafe almost every morning, always ordering the same thing, and they'd have brief, pleasant conversations. Nothing too personal, just light banter about life, coffee, and occasionally a little bit about their days. Mia didn't know who he was, but Alexander was content with that. He didn't want to be recognized here. He didn't want to be the CEO of Lee Holdings for a while. He just wanted to be himself. But as they grew more comfortable around each other, Alexander began to feel the weight of something else. He found himself looking forward to his morning coffee, not just for the caffeine, but for the chance to talk to Mia. He had never been in a relationship where he didn't know if the other person truly cared for him, or if they were only interested in his wealth and status. He realized something that scared him. He didn't want Mia to care about his money. He didn't want her to think he was just another wealthy guy looking for attention. He wanted her to like him for who he was. But how could he know if she did? As the days passed, Mia started noticing that Alexander's presence became more familiar. He was a regular at the cafe now, coming in every morning, always ordering the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, and always sitting in the same corner near the window. At first, she didn't think much of it, but over time, she began to look forward to his visits. The casual conversations they had seemed effortless, light, and comforting. Yet, something about it felt different, as if there was more to him than what he showed on the surface. One morning, he walked in like he always did, but this time, instead of heading to his usual spot, he took a seat right at the counter, directly where Mia was working. She raised an eyebrow, surprised by the change in routine, but didn't let it show. "Hey, can I get a black coffee today?" "No sugar, just like always," Alexander said with a soft smile. "Of course," she replied, already preparing his coffee. "Seems like you want to change things up today." "Yeah, I guess you could say that," he replied, settling in and glancing around the cafe. There was something in his eyes, a sort of quiet contemplation, that made Mia pause for a moment. He wasn't just another customer. There was a depth to him that intrigued her. "How's your day going?" she asked, handing him the coffee. "It's going well. Just needed a change of scenery," he said, taking a sip. "And I've been thinking a lot about things lately." Mia didn't know what he meant by that, but she knew that Alexander wasn't like the usual crowd that came in every morning. He was more reserved, more introspective, and the longer they talked, the more she realized he wasn't just here for the coffee. "Alexander, what's been on your mind?" she asked casually, wiping down the counter. It felt like the right question to ask. He looked at her for a moment, almost as if he was weighing his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice more serious than usual. "Do you ever think about leaving all of this behind? Like, just walking away and doing something different? I mean, it's easy to get stuck in routines, right?" Mia blinked, surprised by the question. "Leaving this behind? You mean my job here?" He shrugged. "Not necessarily. I mean more like doing something bigger, something different from the ordinary. Getting away from the city, the expectations, the constant noise. Mia leaned against the counter, considering his words. She never really thought about leaving California or making any big changes in her life. I think I'm okay with the life I have, she said. I'm happy with the simplicity of it. But I guess I understand what you mean. The world can feel pretty overwhelming sometimes. He nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, but sometimes I wonder if I'm missing out on something. If I'm just going through the motions. The conversation lingered in the air, and Mia felt something shift between them. He wasn't just asking about her life. He was probing into something deeper, something that hinted at his own dissatisfaction with the life he led. But Mia couldn't quite put her finger on it. Over the next few weeks, Mia and Alexander continued to meet each morning. Their conversations became more personal, and Mia couldn't deny that she was enjoying their time together. But there was something that had started to bug her. Alexander wasn't acting like his usual confident self. He was becoming more distant, more withdrawn. And there was something else, something about his appearance. One morning, Mia noticed that Alexander had started wearing more casual clothes. He no longer wore his sharp suits or drove his usual sleek car. Instead, he showed up in a faded denim jacket, sneakers, and drove an old beat-up car that barely started at first. Mia didn't think much of it, but as the days went on, she couldn't ignore the change. Was he going through a rough patch? Or was something else going on? One evening, after the cafe had slowed down and there were fewer customers, Mia couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. She had to know what was going on with him. Alexander, you've been different lately. Is everything okay? She asked, trying to sound casual but also concerned. You're not like the guy I met when we first started talking. He smiled faintly, but his eyes held a shadow of something deeper, something that made Mia's heart race just a little. Yeah, I guess I'm not. But don't worry. I'm fine. Just trying something different, trying to see the world from a different perspective. Mia didn't buy it. She'd known him long enough now to see through his calm exterior. Something was off, and she couldn't quite figure out what it was. I don't mean to pry, but this whole change in your life, what's it about? She pressed, her voice soft yet sincere. He sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair. Honestly, Mia, I'm just tired of pretending. I'm tired of being someone I'm not, or maybe not even being sure who I really am anymore. I wanted to know if you'd still like me if I wasn't the guy you thought I was. Mia froze, her mind racing. She didn't know how to react. Could he be talking about his wealth? His power? The life he had? She had no idea who Alexander really was beneath the surface. But she was starting to feel a deep connection with the man who was sitting in front of her now. As Alexander opened up, Mia started to understand the depth of his struggle. For so long, he had lived a life of wealth and privilege, but now, in the face of something real, something authentic, he didn't know if Mia would accept him for who he truly was. But Mia didn't know the full story yet. She didn't know that Alexander was not just a man struggling with his identity. He was also a billionaire CEO, the head of a major financial empire. She didn't know that his entire life had been a facade, one he had created to shield himself from the world. He wasn't just trying to find himself. He was testing Mia, testing her love for the person he truly was. Not the image he projected, but how could Mia trust him when everything about him seemed like a mystery? How could she love him when she didn't even know who he really was? Mia walked into Bean and Brew the next morning, her thoughts tangled from the night before. Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "I'm tired of pretending." The vulnerability in his voice had struck her deeply. For a moment, she wondered if she'd been too quick to judge. Maybe she hadn't fully understood who he was. She glanced around the cafe, but she didn't see him sitting in his usual spot. Mia's heart sank a little, but she shook it off. He probably just had something to take care of. It was normal to have days where you didn't feel like sticking to your routine. However, a few minutes later, the door opened and Alexander walked in. This time, his appearance made Mia pause for a second longer than usual. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers still dressed down, but this time it felt like he was more vulnerable than he had been before. There was no attempt to mask his identity anymore, and that unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. "Hey, Mia," Alexander said as he approached the counter, offering her a small, uncertain smile. His usual confident demeanor seemed to have disappeared. "Morning," she replied, her voice a little quieter than usual. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed between them. "Same as always?" she asked, trying to keep the tone casual, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah. Black coffee," he replied, looking at her with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "And can we talk for a second?" Mia paused. She'd been preparing herself for this moment ever since their last conversation. She hadn't realized how much she was hoping for the truth, but was she ready for it? "Of course," she said, nodding as she handed him his coffee. She gestured toward the back of the cafe, where the small, quiet corner was just the place for a conversation without distractions. They sat down, and Mia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The silence between them was palpable, thick with unspoken words. She waited, but Alexander didn't speak right away. "I've been thinking about what I said last night," Alexander began, his voice low and filled with an almost hesitant sincerity. "And I want to be upfront with you, Mia. I know I've been acting ... different. I've been trying to figure out if I could be the person you think I am." Mia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" Alexander took a deep breath. "You know how I said I was tired of pretending. The truth is, I've been hiding who I am for so long that I don't even know how to be honest anymore. But you deserve the truth. You deserve more than what I've shown you." There was a long pause, and Mia felt her chest tighten. She wanted to know the truth, but was she ready for it? "Okay, so what's the truth?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Alexander looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of vulnerability and regret. "Mia, I'm not just a regular guy. I'm the CEO of Lee Holdings, one of the largest financial corporations in the city." The words hit Mia like a punch to the gut. She stared at him for a moment, trying to process what he'd just said. Was this some kind of joke? He had never mentioned his career or his wealth before. "You're a CEO," she whispered, almost disbelieving. "You've been pretending to be." "What? Just a regular guy?" Alexander nodded, his eyes not meeting hers. "Yes, I've been pretending to be someone I'm not, because I wanted to know if you would like me for who I really am, me, not the guy with all the money and power. I wanted to see if you could love the real me, or if you just liked the idea of who I am." Mia blinked, trying to hold back the wave of emotions rushing through her. "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" "I thought maybe I could get the answer to something I've always wondered. I've been surrounded by people who only care about what I can offer them, my money, my status. I wanted to know if you'd care about me, just for me, Alexander said, his voice laced with frustration. But now I realize I shouldn't have tested you like this. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry. Mia sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had always been so cautious with people, especially men. She had no idea why, but she had felt a genuine connection with Alexander. But now that the truth had come out, everything felt so complicated. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice shaky. You lied to me. You hid who you were. I trusted you. I thought we had something real. I know, and I'm sorry. But I want to make it right, he said, his eyes pleading. I don't want to lose you. I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you would just see me as another rich guy, someone who has everything and still isn't happy. But the truth is, I've never felt this way before. Not with anyone. Mia leaned forward, her hands pressed against the table. So, everything was a lie. The way you acted. The way we got close. All of that was just part of your test. Her voice cracked a little as she spoke. Alexander lowered his gaze, shame creeping into his features. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but now I understand. I've made a huge mistake. I wanted to be honest with you, Mia, but I did it the wrong way. For the first time in their conversations, Mia felt a pang of doubt. She had trusted him. She had begun to fall for the man who had become a constant part of her days. But now, she wasn't sure if she was just another person caught in his game. Another person he wanted to prove. Something to stop. Mia took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The truth was hard to swallow, but she also knew that she couldn't make a decision in the heat of the moment. Alexander had been honest with her, but honesty alone didn't make everything okay. I need some time, she said finally, standing up from the table. I need to think about all of this. Alexander didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes filled with regret. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I don't want to lose you, Mia. The next few days passed in a blur for Mia. She couldn't stop replaying the conversation with Alexander in her mind. Every word, every look he gave her, felt like it was etched into her memory. But the truth he had revealed had shaken her to the core. She had always prided herself on being independent, on not letting anyone manipulate her emotions. And yet here she was, torn between the man she had grown close to and the man who had lied to her. She had spent the last few days keeping her distance, trying to clear her head. Her mornings at Bean and Brew felt empty without Alexander's familiar face across the counter. His absence was almost suffocating, but she knew she needed space to think, to process what she had learned about him and what it meant for their future. There even was one afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the California sky. Mia found herself walking along the pier near the beach, the cool ocean breeze brushing against her face. She'd always loved the beach, the sense of freedom and peace it gave her. It was the perfect place to clear her mind, but even here, she couldn't escape the thoughts of Alexander. Alexander, on the other hand, had been drowning in his own regrets. He had given Mia the truth finally, but it hadn't felt like a victory. He had expected her to be shocked, maybe even angry, but he hadn't anticipated how much her silence would sting. The space she had taken from him felt like a gulf he couldn't cross. Each day, he found himself checking his phone for a message, a call, anything from Mia. But each time, the screen remained dark. He knew he had messed up, but he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. Not after everything they had shared. Not after how much he had begun to care for her. It was late one evening when Alexander couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't just sit back and wait for Mia to come to him. He needed to see her. He needed to explain himself fully, to ask for her forgiveness in person. With a sense of urgency, he texted her, "Can we meet? I need to talk." A few minutes later, a response came through. "I think it's time." Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with nervousness. He was about to face Mia not as the man she had been getting to know, but as the man he truly was. And he wasn't sure if she would still be able to look at him the same way. They agreed to meet at Bean and Brew again, the place where it all started. Mia had suggested the cafe for their conversation, and Alexander couldn't help but feel a strange sense of déjà vu as he walked through the door. But this time, things were different. They were no longer strangers discovering each other for the first time. They were two people who had been through a storm, each grappling with their own emotions, trying to find common ground again. Mia was already sitting at the counter when he arrived. She looked as beautiful as ever, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes tired but sharp. But there was something guarded in her posture that he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't the same carefree girl who used to smile at him over their coffee cups. She was someone who had been hurt and he was the cause of it. "Hey," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. He didn't know how to start, but he knew he had to say something. Anything to bridge the distance between them. "Hi," she replied, her voice cool but not unfriendly. There was a moment of silence between them, both of them unsure of what to say next. Finally, Alexander spoke. "I know I've messed up, Mia, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just ... scared. I thought that if I told you who I really was, you'd only care about the money and the power, not about me." Mia took a deep breath, looking at him with a mix of sadness and frustration. "That's the thing, Alexander. I don't care about your money. I never did. I care about you. But you lied to me. You tested me, and now I feel like I don't even know who you are." Alexander's heart ached at the words. He had known this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. "I know I should have trusted you. I should have been honest from the start. I just didn't want to be seen as the CEO. I didn't want to be someone who was only loved because of what I could offer. Alexander, I never loved you for your wealth," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I loved you for who you were. But now I'm questioning everything. How can I trust you when I don't even know the real you?" The silence between them stretched on, neither one of them knowing how to move forward. But then Alexander took a deep breath and said, "I want to prove to you that I'm not just my job. I'm not just a businessman. I'm a man who's fallen for you. And I don't want to lose you because of my own insecurities." Mia looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "I don't know if I can just forget about everything, Alexander. But I'm willing to try. If you're willing to show me that you're more than just the CEO, that you're someone I can trust, then maybe, just maybe, we can move forward." Alexander nodded, his heart lifting with hope. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mia, I promise." The days that followed were filled with a quiet, slow rebuilding. Alexander made the effort to show Mia the man behind the title, someone who wasn't just a CEO, but someone who wanted to be loved for his true self. He spent time with her outside of the cafe, doing things that had nothing to do with business or wealth. They walked along the beach, shared stories, and talked about their hopes, their dreams, and their fears, and for the first time, Mia felt like she was seeing the real Alexander, the man who had been hiding behind the wealth, the power, and the fear of being unloved. But now she could see the vulnerability in him, the man who just wanted to be accepted for who he truly was. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to rebuild their trust, their connection, and their relationship. It had been 2 weeks since Mia and Alexander started rebuilding their relationship. The early days were slow but steady, long walks on the beach, dinners at little-known restaurants, and endless conversations about their lives, dreams, and fears. Mia was starting to see the real Alexander, the man who was kind, genuine, and, most of all, vulnerable. But as much as Alexander had shown his true self, the shadow of his past, the weight of his wealth, his position as CEO still lingered over them. Mia had never fully understood the power he wielded, and she had never wanted to. She loved the man who sat across from her every evening, but the world he came from was something entirely different, something she wasn't sure she could ever be part of. One evening, as they sat in the cafe, Mia was feeling more at ease than ever before. Alexander was sharing a funny story about his childhood, something she hadn't heard from him before. She smiled, enjoying the sound of his laughter, the warmth in his eyes. But then, as he was about to take a sip of his coffee, his phone buzzed on the table. Alexander glanced at the screen, his face instantly changing. The light in his eyes dimmed, and his posture stiffened. "Mia," he said, putting the phone down and trying to mask the tension in his voice, "I need to take this call." "It's urgent." "Sure," she replied, though she couldn't hide the flicker of concern in her voice. She watched him step away from the table, his face serious, his body tensed. The moment he walked away, Mia couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She knew that he still carried the weight of being the CEO, but she had hoped that, at least for a little while, he could be free from it all. Alexander stood in the corner of the cafe, his eyes scanning the phone screen as he answered the call. "This is Alexander Lee," he said, his voice firm, businesslike. "Alexander, it's Henry from the board," came the voice on the other end. "We need you here now. The situation is escalating. If you don't handle it immediately, it's going to affect everything Lee Holdings, Quantum, and everything you've worked for." Mia couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but she could see the tension on Alexander's face. He nodded, said a few words, and hung up quickly. When he returned to the table, his face was even more drawn than before. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was a hint of fear in his eyes. "We need to go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's an emergency at the company. I have to take care of it." Mia's heart sank as she followed him to his car. She knew what this meant. The world that Alexander had tried so hard to leave behind was pulling him back in. He wasn't the man who had spent the last 2 weeks laughing and sharing stories. He was Alexander Lee, the CEO, the man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. They drove through the streets of Los Angeles in silence, the city's lights flashing past them. The closer they got to Lee Holdings, the more tense Alexander became. He kept glancing at his phone, checking messages, and muttering under his breath. "Mia, I'm sorry," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I didn't want you to see this side of me. But the company, it's not just mine anymore. There are people depending on me." "I get it," Mia replied softly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing him, again losing the man she had come to know, the one who had opened up to her, The world he was stepping back into was something she could never be a part of. No matter how much she loved him, they arrived at the sleek glass and steel building of Lee Holdings. Alexander rushed inside, his face now set with determination. Mia followed, feeling like an outsider in a world she had never been prepared for. As they walked into the elevator, she couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was. The way the employees quickly cleared the way for him. The way they spoke to him with a mix of respect and fear. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the boardroom. The room was full of tense executives, all watching as Alexander walked in, his eyes cold and calculating. The moment he entered, all conversations stopped. "Alexander, thank God you're here," Henry, one of the senior board members, said urgently. "We've been hacked. Someone's trying to sabotage the quantum project. And if we don't do something now, it's going to bring down everything." Mia watched as Alexander immediately took charge. His posture straightened, his voice commanding as he addressed the team. "We need to secure the data. Find out who's behind this and stop them before they can do any more damage. Get me everything we have immediately." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander didn't leave the room, pacing back and forth, issuing orders and making phone calls. Mia stood by, watching as the man she had come to care for switched back into CEO mode. The man she had known was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating leader of $1 billion empire. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alexander stopped, his face pale. "We've traced the breach back to someone on the inside," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's someone we trusted. Someone close to me." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. She had always known Alexander was surrounded by people who might want to bring him down, but she had never imagined someone in his inner circle would betray him. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alexander didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to his assistant, who handed him a folder. He opened it and stared at the name in front of him, his face hardening. "Henry," he whispered. Mia's heart stopped. The man who had just been speaking with them, the man who had seemed so loyal, Henry, was the one behind the attack. Alexander slammed the folder shut, his fists clenched. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "I've trusted him for years. He's been working against me all along." The revelation hit Mia like a ton of bricks. Everything that Alexander had built, everything he had worked for, was now in jeopardy because of someone he had trusted implicitly. As Mia watched Alexander navigate the chaos, she realized that no matter how much she loved him, no matter how much she wanted to be with him, she couldn't be part of this world. It was a world built on secrets, betrayals, and lies. Alexander had tried to protect her from it, but now she was standing right in the middle of it. "I have to deal with this," Alexander said, his voice tight with frustration. "I need to fix this before it destroys everything." Mia nodded, her heart heavy. She knew what had to be done, but she also knew she couldn't stay in this world forever. It was too dangerous, too consuming. "I understand," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I can't be part of this anymore, Alexander. I can't watch you destroy yourself for something that's always going to be bigger than us." The weeks after the discovery of Henry's betrayal were filled with tension. Mia had been trying to find peace, but everything around her felt like it was spiraling out of control. Alexander was consumed by the crisis at Lee Holdings. The sabotage of the quantum project was a massive blow, and his trust in his team had been shattered. What had started as a simple, promising relationship was now tangled in a web of corporate intrigue, lies, and distrust. Mia had kept her distance, allowing Alexander to deal with the fallout from the betrayal. But the weight of the situation was beginning to take its toll on her. She had been patient, understanding that Alexander was going through a lot, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was slowly slipping away. They hadn't spoken much in the last few days. Mia could feel the distance growing between them, but she wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. Alexander seemed lost in his world, consumed by the demands of his company, and the constant presence of the betrayal weighed heavily on him. One afternoon, Mia found herself at Bean and Brew, sitting alone at the counter. The usual calm of the cafe was disrupted by the familiar but unwelcome buzz of her phone. It was a text from Alexander. "Can we meet? I need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him in person for days, and the uncertainty of their relationship hung heavily in the air. Despite the frustration she felt, she quickly typed a response. "Sure, when?" They met later that evening at a quiet restaurant just outside the city, a place Mia had never been to. It was upscale and elegant, the kind of place that Alexander would usually frequent, but tonight there was something different. The usual air of confidence he carried seemed to have disappeared as he sat across from her. His face drawn and tired, Mia couldn't help but notice the change. He was still the man she had grown to care for, but he seemed distant, like he was already lost to the world he had created. "Mia," he started, his voice strained. "I know I've been distant lately. I've been dealing with too much at work, and I haven't been fair to you. I'm sorry." She shook her head slightly, not sure how to react. "Alexander, it's not just about you being distant. It's about everything. About Henry, about the lies. I can't just forget what happened." "I know," Alexander said quietly. "I don't expect you to. I've spent my whole life building this empire, and I thought I had everything figured out. But now, I realize I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore." Mia looked at him, her heart aching. "I don't know if I can be part of this world, Alexander. It's not just about you, it's about the life you're living. I can't keep waiting for you to figure it out." Mia stood up, her hands trembling. She felt like her whole world had been turned upside down in the past few weeks. She had fallen for Alexander, the man who had been so kind and vulnerable, the man who had opened up to her. But now everything felt like a lie. "Mia, please," Alexander said, his voice breaking. He reached out to her, but she stepped back, not knowing what else to say. "Don't walk away from me. Not like this. We've been through so much together." "But we haven't, Alexander," she said, her voice trembling. "We haven't been through anything together, not really. I've been living in a fantasy, thinking that things would just fall into place. But they're not. You're not the person I thought you were. You've built this life of power and control, and I don't know if I can be part of it." There was a moment of silence between them, one that felt heavier than anything they had shared before. Alexander took a deep breath, trying to collect himself. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost pleading. "I don't want this life anymore," he confessed, his eyes locking with hers. "Not without you. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make everything right." Mia looked at him, her heart breaking for the man sitting across from her. She had always seen the humanity in him, but now she was questioning everything. Could they rebuild what they had? Or had the weight of his world, his wealth, his empire already torn them apart? After a long silence, Mia took a deep breath and made the decision that had been lingering in her heart for days. "I love you, Alexander," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "But I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be. I don't know if I can fit into the life you've built. You have to choose this life or us." Alexander stood up, his face a mix of anguish and determination. He knew that he had reached a crossroads in his life, and he couldn't keep living in the shadows of his own making. The decision wasn't just about Mia. It was about who he wanted to be moving forward. Could he let go of the empire he had built, the world of power and control, to create a future with her? Or would he lose everything, including her, in the process? "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll choose us, Mia. I will. But I need your help. I don't want to do this alone." Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a deep sadness. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: Alexander was willing to fight for them. And for the first time, she realized she was ready to fight too. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Alexander would have to make sacrifices. He would have to leave behind the life that had defined him for so long. And Mia would have to decide if she was truly ready to walk that path with him. Knowing the challenges that lay ahead, "I'll be here with you," she said softly. "But we both have a lot to figure out, and it won't be easy." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice filled with resolve. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For us." The days following their conversation were filled with uncertainty. Alexander and Mia had made a decision to move forward together, but neither of them truly understood what that meant. Alexander had promised to step away from the world of corporate power and privilege, to choose Mia over the life that had defined him for so long. But as the weight of that decision began to sink in, both of them realized that it was far easier said than done. Mia had been cautiously optimistic. She wanted to believe that Alexander could change, that he could leave behind the life of power and greed that had consumed him for years. But doubts crept in. Could someone who had built an empire from the ground up really walk away from it all? And even if he could, would the people around him let him? Meanwhile, Alexander struggled with the idea of leaving Lee Holdings, a company he had spent a decade building. He had been the architect of its success, the man who had made billions of dollars and played a pivotal role in shaping the future of finance. The idea of walking away from that was terrifying. But for Mia, he was willing to try. One afternoon, Alexander received a call that would change everything. It had been 2 weeks since the confrontation with Mia, and he was starting to feel the weight of his decision. He had been trying to live a quieter life, spending more time with her, doing things that were, in his eyes, simple. But as much as he tried to let go of his past, it always seemed to find a way back into his life. "Alexander," the voice on the other end said, "this is Henry. We need you back at the company. Quantum is on the verge of collapse, and we can't do this without you." Alexander's pulse quickened. Henry, the man who had betrayed him, was now asking for his help. It didn't make sense. But the urgency in his voice, the gravity of the situation, made it clear. The company was in trouble. "I've told you before, Henry, I'm not coming back," Alexander said, his voice cold. "I'm done with that life." "We both know you can't walk away, Alexander," Henry persisted. "You can't leave this behind. It's your legacy. Without you, everything we've built will fall apart. Think about what you're throwing away. Think about what you can still achieve." Mia entered the room just as Alexander hung up the phone. The conversation had left him rattled, and the last thing he wanted was to drag Mia into this world again. "What's going on?" Mia asked, noticing the tension in his face. Alexander took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I can't run away from it, Mia. No matter how much I want to, the company needs me. Lee Holdings needs me. Mia's heart sank. She had hoped that Alexander would be able to walk away from his past, but now it was clear that he was struggling. She had always known that he was torn between his ambitions and his love for her, but she never imagined the pull of his empire would be this strong. Do you want to go back? Mia asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Alexander hesitated. He had already made up his mind. Mia was the one thing in his life that truly mattered, but his legacy, the world he had built it, was hard to let go of. I don't know, he admitted, his voice raw. I feel like I'm being torn in two different directions. One side of me wants to run away, to be with you, to start something new. But the other side of me, the side that built this company, that built Quantum, won't let me. The next few days were filled with internal conflict for Alexander. He spent hours at home, pacing back and forth, unable to make a decision. Mia could sense his turmoil, and though she wanted to be supportive, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alexander was slipping away again. One evening, Mia sat across from him in silence. The weight of their unspoken words hung between them. She had been patient, but the strain was becoming too much. She loved him, but she couldn't lose herself in the process. Alexander, she began, her voice breaking the silence. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waiting for you to make a choice. You have to decide us, or the company. I need to know where I stand. His eyes met hers, filled with regret. I know, Mia, but it's not as simple as you think. I've spent my whole life building this. How can I just walk away from everything? Mia stood up, her hands clenched in frustration. You're not just walking away from a company, Alexander. You're walking away from us. From me. From everything that matters. That night, Alexander received another call. This time, it was from Henry again. But this call was different. Alexander, Henry's voice, came through the line, urgent and desperate. The company is being attacked. There's a leak, and if we don't stop it now, it could destroy everything. We need you. Mia was sitting next to him as he listened to the call, and her heart sank. She could see it in his eyes. The conflict, the hesitation, the desire to help, but the fear of losing her. She knew this was it. This was the moment when Alexander would have to make a choice. Mia, Alexander said, looking at her with pain in his eyes. I have to go. This is bigger than anything I've ever faced. I need to fix this, for the company, for everything. Mia stood, her heart breaking. She had known this moment was coming, but she hadn't been ready for it. She looked at him, her voice trembling. I can't do this, Alexander. I can't keep being part of a life that isn't mine. The decision had been made. Alexander knew what he had to do, but in doing so, he risked losing Mia forever. Mia knew that if she stayed, she would lose herself in his world. She would be forced to live in the shadow of a life she didn't belong to. And so, as Alexander left for the office, the weight of their love hung in the balance. Would he come back to her, or would the allure of his empire pull him away forever? The cold, sterile lights of Lee Holdings flickered as Alexander strode into the building, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had just made. The familiar buzz of office phones and the hum of computers had never felt so hollow. Every step he took toward the boardroom felt like a betrayal, not just to Mia, but to himself. He had made his choice, but the question still lingered in his mind. Was it the right one? Inside the boardroom, the team was already waiting. Henry stood at the head of the table, his usual smug demeanor replaced by something more urgent. The moment Alexander entered, the room fell silent. "We've got a serious issue on our hands," Henry began, without bothering with pleasantries. "We've been hacked, and it's worse than we thought. The quantum project is being manipulated from the inside. If we don't act fast, everything we've worked for will crumble." Alexander could feel the weight of the room pressing on him. He was the leader of this empire, but as he looked at the worried faces around him, the reality of his decision hit harder than ever. He had promised Mia that he would leave this behind, that he would walk away from the life of control and greed. Yet here he was, drawn back into the very world he had promised her he would escape. "I'm here," Alexander said, his voice cold. "What do we need to do?" Back at her apartment, Mia sat in the quiet darkness, her mind racing. The phone call from earlier still lingered in her ears. "I have to go. This is bigger than anything I've ever faced. I need to fix this, for the company, for everything." The words had hit her harder than she expected. Mia knew that Alexander was driven, that the company was his life. But in that moment, she realized just how much she had underestimated the pull of his empire. He had promised her that he would choose them, that he would step away from this world. But the phone call had shattered that promise in an instant. The tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let herself be dragged into the chaos of his world. Yet, here she was, stuck in the limbo of wanting him, but knowing that she could never be a part of the life he had built. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights below. The skyline of Los Angeles glittered like 1,000 promises, but to Mia, it now felt like a prison. She could feel the walls closing in. Could she really keep waiting for someone who was never truly present? Could she stay with a man who was so consumed by his past that he could barely see the future? The next day, Mia made a decision. She needed to face Alexander once and for all. She couldn't keep living in this uncertain space, torn between loving him and feeling like an outsider in his life. When Alexander returned to the apartment that evening, Mia was waiting for him. She had already packed a small bag, a final attempt at regaining control over her life. He walked in, looking weary and burdened, his tie loosened, and his shoulders slumped. But when he saw the suitcase by the door, his heart sank. "Mia," he began, his voice thick with exhaustion. "I didn't want you to see it this way. I didn't want you to think I was running away from us." "You didn't," Mia replied softly, her voice shaky but resolute. "You've already run away. You've chosen your world over us." Alexander's face twisted with guilt. He closed the door behind him and walked toward her. "It's not that simple, Mia. I don't know how to walk away from this life. I thought I could leave it behind for you, but I'm realizing that I can't just turn off everything I've built. This company, it's who I am." Mia took a step back, feeling the finality of his words. "You've made your choice, Alexander. And so have I." Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He had always thought Mia would be the one to wait for him, to understand that this was just a momentary setback. But now, standing before her, he realized that he had underestimated how much Mia needed to be loved, to be seen, to be valued beyond the shadow of his empire. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't leave me, Mia. I can't lose you." But Mia shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to leave you, Alexander. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep waiting for you to choose me. You say you'll change, but I don't know if you even want to." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. The moment felt like it was suspended in time, and for a split second, Alexander felt like he was suffocating. The reality of what he was about to lose, what he had already lost, hit him like a wave. "Mia," he said, voice hoarse, "please don't go. I can't promise you anything, but I swear I'll try. I swear I'll choose you if you'll let me." Mia paused at the door, her hand resting on the doorknob. She turned to look at him one last time, her expression filled with both love and sorrow. "I can't keep living in a world where I'm always second place, Alexander. You have to choose. And if you don't choose me, I won't be here anymore." With that, she left. Alexander stood in the middle of the apartment, feeling the walls close in around him. He had spent so much time building an empire that he had forgotten what it meant to love, to truly love. Without expectations, without power, the days that followed were a blur. Mia had left, and Alexander found himself alone again, surrounded by the empire he had built, but unable to feel its weight. He sat at his desk in the office, the city skyline visible through the window. But the view did nothing to comfort him anymore. He had been so consumed by the idea of success, of control, that he had lost sight of what mattered most. Mia had given him everything, and he had let her slip away. But Alexander knew that it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. He had to make a choice between the empire he had built and the woman he loved. And in the quiet stillness of his office, he finally realized the truth. He couldn't have both. The days following Mia's departure were the hardest of Alexander's life. The apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt empty. The silence was deafening, and every inch of the space seemed to echo with the absence of the woman he loved. His life, once dominated by business meetings and the pursuit of success, now felt shallow and hollow. He had been so focused on building an empire that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Mia, he tried to distract himself with work, diving deep into the crisis at Lee Holdings and dealing with the fallout from Henry's betrayal. But even that felt like a temporary escape. Every email, every phone call, every conference call reminded him that he was living a life that wasn't complete. He had it all, but without Mia, it meant nothing. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting meeting, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. The world outside seemed so busy, so full of life, but to him, it felt empty. Mia had left, and no matter how much he wanted to believe that everything would go back to normal, he knew it wouldn't. He stood up and walked over to the desk, picking up his phone. His thumb hovered over the contact for Mia, but his finger hesitated. What could he say? How could he undo everything that had happened? How could he make her believe that he was willing to change, that he was willing to give up everything he had worked for to be with her? He stared at the phone for a long moment, then put it down. It wasn't enough to just say the words. He had to show her, prove to her that he was serious, that he was willing to choose her over everything else. Alexander knew that he had to find Mia, but he didn't know where to start. She had cut ties with him, moved out of the apartment, and refused to take his calls. He didn't blame her. He had pushed her away for too long. But now, more than ever, he realized how much he needed her. He spent the next few days driving around the city, searching for any trace of her. He visited places they had once gone to together, restaurants, coffee shops, the park by the beach where they had spent so many hours talking. Everywhere he went, he felt her absence like a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. It was on the 4th day of his search that he finally found her. He was walking along the pier near the beach when he spotted Mia, standing by the railing, looking out at the ocean. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. She looked serene, peaceful, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made his heart ache. Mia hadn't noticed him approaching, and for a moment, Alexander just stood there, watching her. He didn't know what to say, how to approach her. But then, something in his chest gave way, and he knew that this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. "Mia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned slowly, her eyes locking with his. There was a moment of silence, and Mia's expression was unreadable. She had always been strong, independent, but now, standing there before him, she seemed ... vulnerable. "Alexander," she said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of hurt and resignation. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," he said, taking a step closer. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I can't live like this anymore, Mia. I've spent so much time building an empire, but none of it matters without you. I can't keep pretending that my wealth and my company are all that I need. You're the only thing that matters to me." Mia took a deep breath, her eyes softening just slightly. "Alexander, you don't understand. I can't keep waiting for you to choose me. I need someone who is here, who is fully present, who isn't living in the shadow of a world that doesn't care about anything but power and control." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his voice filled with regret. "I've been living in that world for so long, I forgot what it meant to truly be present, to love. But I swear, Mia, I'm done with it. I'm done with the business, the empire, the power. I'm ready to start a new life with you." There was a long silence between them. Mia looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read the truth in his expression. She had heard him before, heard the promises, the assurances, but now, standing here with him, she wasn't sure if she could believe him. Could he really change? Could he really walk away from everything he had built? But as she looked at him, she saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man who was willing to sacrifice it all. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, and in that moment she knew that this was the man she had always wanted to believe in, the man who had finally realized what truly mattered. "I don't know if I can trust you, Alexander," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but I want to. I want to believe that you can change, that we can start over. But it's going to take time. I need to know that you're ready to give up everything for us, for a future together." Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mia. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm ready to be the man you deserve." The sun dipped below the horizon as Mia took a deep breath, the weight of the decision finally settling in. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Alexander had chosen her, and for the first time in a long time, she believed in the possibility of a new beginning. "I'm willing to try, Alexander," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But it's going to take time. We both have a lot to figure out. But if you're ready to make this work, so am one." Alexander smiled, his heart soaring with relief. "Thank you, Mia. I won't let you down." And as they stood there, side by side, watching the sunset, Mia knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. For the first time, they were finally on the same path. After weeks of rebuilding their relationship, Mia and Alexander were still walking a fine line. Every day felt like a new chapter in their story, a story full of love, vulnerability, and the promise of something better. But the road to true happiness was never easy, especially when the shadows of Alexander's past and the world he had created were never far behind. One evening, Mia and Alexander sat on the balcony of their small apartment, watching the sunset over Los Angeles. It had become a ritual for them to spend their evenings together, just talking, sharing their thoughts and dreams. They had come so far, but Mia knew that there was still one thing left to prove, that Alexander could truly let go of the past, and that Mia could trust him completely. "I've been thinking," Mia said softly, her voice carrying over the gentle evening breeze. "We've made so many changes in our lives, but I can't shake the feeling that there's still something we need to face." Alexander turned to her, his gaze steady. "What do you mean?" Mia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "We've talked about the future, about what we want, but I think it's time to face the truth. The truth about your world, about Lee Holdings, and about the life you've built. Can you truly walk away from all of that? Or is it just too ingrained in you?" For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt a deep unease. He had promised Mia that he would leave behind the life he had built, but Mia's question hit him harder than he expected. Could he truly let go of Lee Holdings, the empire he had spent years constructing? Could he truly give up the power and the influence that had defined his existence? "I've been thinking about that a lot," Alexander admitted, his voice quiet but filled with the weight of his thoughts. "It's not easy to just walk away. This company has been my whole life. But I've realized something. Without you, it means nothing." Mia smiled softly, her eyes filled with tenderness. "I'm glad you're starting to see that, Alexander. But it's not just about you giving up everything you've worked for. It's about us creating something new. Together, we have to make this choice, together." The next day, Alexander made his final decision. He stood in front of the board at Lee Holdings, his heart pounding. Mia had been right. He couldn't keep living in two worlds, one foot in the life he had built and the other in the world he had promised to share with her. It was time to make a choice. The room was filled with executives, all waiting for him to speak. Henry, the man who had betrayed him, was sitting in the corner, watching with a smug expression. Alexander knew that the stakes were high. This was not just about his personal life. It was about the future of Lee Holdings, and the consequences of his decision would affect not just him, but the people who depended on the company. "Thank you all for coming," Alexander began, his voice steady. "I've made a decision that will affect the future of this company, and I want to make it clear that it's not an easy one. After much consideration, I have decided to step down as CEO of Lee Holdings." There was a moment of stunned silence in the room. The executives exchanged nervous glances, but Henry's expression was one of disbelief. "What do you mean, step down?" he asked, trying to mask the panic in his voice. Alexander took a deep breath. "I'm handing over the reins of the company. I will no longer be part of the day-to-day operations. This company has become something that I can no longer be a part of. I've been living for the wrong things, and it's time for a change." As Alexander walked out of the boardroom, his heart was heavy. He had just made the hardest decision of his life. He had given up everything, his empire, his power, but in doing so, he had gained something far more valuable, his freedom, and more importantly, he had gained the chance to rebuild his life with Mia. Later that evening, Alexander met Mia at the place where it all began, Bean and Brew. She was sitting at their usual table, looking out the window at the city lights. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of pride and relief. Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. "It's done. I've stepped down as CEO. The company is no longer my responsibility. It's time for me to start over." Mia stood up and walked over to him, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm so proud of you, Alexander. This was the right choice." He took her hands in his, holding her close. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've given me the strength to let go of the past and embrace the future. And I'm ready to build that future with you, Mia." As the days went by, Alexander and Mia started a new chapter in their lives. The transition wasn't easy. Alexander had to adjust to life outside the company, learning to find joy in the simple things. He spent more time with Mia, enjoying the moments that had once felt too fleeting, and though the past would always be a part of them, they knew that their future was theirs to create. Together, they moved into a small house in the countryside, far away from the chaos of the city and the corporate world. It was a quiet life, but it was the life they both wanted. They spent their days gardening, cooking, and taking long walks under the stars. Mia had always dreamed of a life filled with love and simplicity, and now, with Alexander by her side, that dream had come true as they stood together one evening, looking out over their new home. Alexander took her hand and whispered, "We did it. Mia, we built something real." And Mia, looking at the man she had always known was capable of so much more than wealth and power, smiled. "We're just getting started."